Hi everyone, and welcome back to Comics and Chill, where we are continuing our retrospective of Mark Millar's Millarworld universe. Now, in the previous video, I did not have a lot of great things to say about the books there, other than MPH, which I loved, but I am happy to say we are moving on to a new stage in the Millarworld saga, one that is far less cynical and more hopeful, and which seems to be Mark Millar's love letter to Golden Age comics and superheroes, and old adventure sci-fi serials and such. And this includes Jupiter's Legacy, Jupiter's Circle, and Starlight. And unlike the books in the previous video, it was a real slog to get through some of those. I blasted through all of these in about 3 or 4 days, and I had a great time doing so. Okay, so let's dive in. So first up we have Jupiter's Legacy Volume 1, written by Mark Millar, and masterfully illustrated by Frank Whiteley. And I was thrilled to see these guys back together when this book came out, as they hadn't done anything together since their time on the Authority in the early 2000s. The story starts in the early 1930s, and it follows a character called Sheldon Sampson, who had a big family business that they kind of lost everything in the Wall Street crash of 1929. And after this happens, Sheldon Sampson, he's been receiving these visions of this mysterious island that promises to him, if he's to travel there, it will give him everything he needs to fix America. So he rounds up some family and friends, and they do just that. They go on a big steamboat, they travel out to this island, and you don't see what happens there, at least not right away. And then we cut forward to present day, about 8 years later, and we see that the island did provide Sheldon Sampson and his family and friends that were with him with superpowers, and they have been helping to sort of protect and steer America in a good direction, working alongside whatever elected government is in place. And you also see the heroes' children, who have kind of been maybe neglected by their parents' dedication to superheroing, and their children, especially Sheldon's children, Chloe and Brandon, are kind of like these Kardashian-like socialites. You know, they don't really do anything, they just sort of mill about. They do have superpowers and they're meant to be chipping in, but they don't. And not only has Sheldon kind of dropped the ball on parenting his kids, he's also having issues with his brother, who is one of the people that went with him to the island and has superpowers too, who is not liking the direction that the country's heading in, and his arrogance leads him to think that he can sort of step in, take over government, and fix a lot of America's problems that they're going through in the present day. And Sheldon is absolutely opposed to this. He wants the people to choose their leaders and to trust them to make the right decisions for themselves. And this is kind of the foundation for this whole story. And as I mentioned, Sheldon's kids are a bit off the rails. Chloe seems to be the more carefree one of the two, and she's feeling like she can never live up to her parents in any way whatsoever. She even feels ugly compared to her mother and father. And she also has a track record of, in her words, dating disappointing bad boys instead of trying to actually maintain a proper relationship with someone, because she feels, compared to her perfect parents' marriage, that she would only fail. Meanwhile, Brandon is a lot more bitter about the big shadow that his father casts, and how he feels like nothing more than a disappointment to him, not being able to live up to his high standards. And a quote from Sheldon to Brandon, his own son, after Brandon drunkenly tries to help with his superpowers and makes a big mistake. Sheldon says to Brandon, "My problem is that I wanted a successor and ended up with a disgrace." And all this is just in issues 1 and 2. After Sheldon catches his brother Walter, who I mentioned previously, who wants to take over government and has psychic powers. After Sheldon catches him trying to persuade the government to follow a financial plan that he has created to fix the economy, the two have a big falling out, and Walter then begins to manipulate Sheldon's son, Brandon, into going against his father, as he is not powerful enough to do so by himself. And this is where the story really kicks off. Now, I don't want to spoil what happens next, because it will probably take from your enjoyment of reading the book. You should discover this yourself, but things happen, and Walter, along with Brandon, do end up taking over government, and there's a time jump of 9 years, and it shows the state of the world after 9 years of them running it, and it's pretty much a police state. And that's where the first volume ends. How it gets there, I'll let you find that out for yourself. But that pretty much sums up the broad strokes of Volume 1, which is only 5 issues long. And where did this idea come from? So Millar said The idea first sparked when he read Carrie Fisher's autobiography and found out that she, despite playing Princess Leia in Star Wars, did not feel very significant when compared to her more famous parents. And this set him down the road of thinking, he loved Star Wars, he couldn't believe that someone he adored felt this way. And it set him down the road of thinking what it would be like to be the son or daughter of Superman and Wonder Woman and trying to live up to them. So as these ideas were kicking around, Quietly actually approached Millar to see if he had anything he could work on, wanted to give creator-owned work another try, and that's when Millar began to flesh out this world, pulling inspiration from Star Wars, King Kong, Roman mythology, and the golden age of comics, wanting the book to be simple and mainstream, but also quite unusual and in-depth. He also wanted it to read as an epic comic book crossover event, one that you would find at Marvel or DC, but with no extra reading required, no crap tie-ins or anything like that. You just get the meat. So this was initially a plan to be released bi-monthly to give Frank Quitely a bit more time with the artwork. However, there still were issues with delays. According to Millar, Quitely came out of the gate pretty strong with about 3 pages a week, but around issue 3 and 4 there were problems with delays, which came down to Quitely's self-doubt. He would spend a ton of time working on page layouts, just reworking his page layouts, trying to find new and interesting ways to visually tell the story, usually to only return to his first or second layout after drawing about 20 of them. And at the same time, he was working on Pax Americana for Grant Morrison, which was taking him a lot of time to get done. I don't think it was ever late, but I think they were waiting on him to announce that whole Multiversity series. And eventually, after Mark Millar spoke with him to see what was going on, they talked the issue through about him overworking these layouts. And Mark Millar actually recommended a neighbor of his who was a hypnotist for Quitely to go see. And apparently, in about 3 or 4 sessions, Quitely was fixed, and he was drawing a lot faster and was not overthinking his page layouts anymore. But before being cured by hypnotism, there was nearly a 6-month delay between issues 3 and 4, and then nearly a full year between issues 4 and 5. So this eventually led to Millar insisting that all artwork be complete on a Millarworld book before publication began. But in case you can't tell already, I absolutely loved this series. It was a pure joy to read. I really liked the contrast between the sort of old-timey origin era of the superheroes in the 30s and the present day. The characters and family dynamics, the rifts between people are great and established very quickly. Millar and Quitely do a great job of making you feel that this world and these characters have been around for a while, which helps feed into that big comic book crossover event feeling that Millar wanted this series to have. And it's not just balls out action and set pieces. A lot of these characters really get put through the ringer, but by the time you get to that point, you really care for them and what happens to them, which I feel isn't always the case with a Millar book. And I really, really liked how the superheroes got their powers. I can't spoil it here, but it's something that I thought was quite unique for a superhero story like this. Okay, so next up we've got Starlight, and Starlight follows a guy called Duke McQueen, a test pilot who in his youth got sucked into a wormhole during a mission and ended up on an alien planet. And whilst there, he helped lead an uprising to topple an evil dictator and restore the planet to its people. The Queen asks him to stay and to be her lover and king, but he says he's got a girl back home and he leaves the planet a hero. However, when he returns to Earth, no one believes him except his wife, and he's kind of treated around town as a bit of a joke for the rest of his life. 40 years go by, his kids have grown up and moved out. His wife has, when the story begins, recently passed away and he is left alone. However, he gets the call to go back to that alien planet to help them once again. Realizing that he has nothing to lose, he sets off for one more adventure. And this book is absolutely amazing. But we'll get to that in a little bit. First of all, Millar describes this book as Buzz Lightyear meets Unforgiven, and that he has had the idea rolling around in his head since he was a little kid, inspired by older sci-fi adventure stories like Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, and John Carter, wondering what life would be like for these kinds of heroes after their adventuring lives were over. And it's pretty clear when you read this book that those are the inspirations. And yeah, I absolutely love this. I picked it up as it was coming out. I was a big fan of the artist Goran Parlov beforehand. His art on this is incredible. He can do it all, and it seems to have, he's really ramped up his Mobius dial to 11 on this one. His art is always excellent. He has great staging and storytelling. However, he seems to be opting for a more delicate and clean line on this series, as opposed to his work on things like Fury Max. This, combined with the subject matter and his designs for this sort of retro sci-fi adventure world leads to something really, really special. He also handles more grounded and realistic elements back on Earth incredibly well, which leads to a wonderful contrast between the worlds. Now, the story's not going to blow your mind with its originality. You've definitely read or watched things like this before. An old man, trying to return to his former glory, that sort of thing. But seeing it in this setting is fantastic, and it's brilliantly paced and masterfully directed by Parlov. You can definitely read this thing in one sitting, and it does have a warm, comforting feeling of a great 1980s sci-fi movie, maybe directed by Spielberg or Lucas or Ridley Scott, something like that. My recommendation for reading this is sit down on a Sunday in a nice comfy chair, hot drink by your side, read the whole thing in one go, and you won't regret it. Alright, next up we've got Jupiter's Circle Volumes 1 and 2. I'm just going to merge these together because it felt like it ran as one long series. I'll start with the story. It's basically a series of shorter story arcs, usually about 2 issues in length, that focuses on the original members of the Union, which is the name of the super team in Jupiter's Legacy, during the late 50s and 60s. The series very much has the vibe of the TV show Mad Men, with most of the superheroics taking a back seat to allow exploration of the personal lives of the heroes. It also contains real historical figures. For example, one character is a closeted gay man who is being investigated and blackmailed by J. Edgar Hoover. The stories also feature actresses and celebrities from that time. There's another short story which focuses on one of the heroes who leaves his wife for a younger teenage superhero who's on one of the teen squad teams. However, gradually all these shorter stories and character dynamics bleed into a longer arc which plays out in Jupiter's Circle Volume 2. Whilst I'd say Jupiter's Circle is not absolutely required reading to understand Jupiter's Legacy, I do feel that you would be missing out, as it does set up a lot of character dynamics and explains why in the present day certain members of the Union are aligned the way that they are. What's kind of funny about this is that initially when Jupiter's Legacy was coming out, or when it was announced, Millar initially said that outside of the origin scenes in Jupiter's Legacy, there would never be any stories set in the golden or silver age era of superheroes, saying that he'd felt that the trope had kind of been played out in these superhero deconstruction stories elsewhere. So my best guess for this series' existence is the massive delays in the core title, with Millar wanting to keep the readers engaged and the franchise relevant whilst quietly got caught up on his artwork. With the setting and storytelling style, I really think Millar couldn't have picked a better artist than Wilfredo Torres to work with, who prior to this had worked on The Shadow Year 1, Batman 66, and Quantum and Woody. He has an excellent, clean-cut, classic style and handles drawing mid-century design, whether that be fashion or furniture or architecture, very well. And I was a big fan of his work prior to him working on this, so I was absolutely delighted when this series was announced with him working on the book. However, tragically, around about the time he was working on issue 3, Torres lost his wife to breast cancer. He was able to finish over half of the issues across the 2 volumes, but to keep the book on schedule and not have it fall off like Jupiter's Legacy did, a whole bunch of other artists were brought in to keep things on track. And the artist brought on with Volume 1 to help, I'm going to butcher this name, was David Gianfelice. And while his panel layouts and blocking does keep in the style of Torres' work, the difference is still quite noticeable. Sometimes things look pretty rough and rushed, other pages look better, but it really does vary from page to page sometimes, even within the same scene. Now on Volume 2, there was a total of 7 artists, both pencilers and inkers, involved across the 6 issues. That being said, Chris Sprouse, who I'm a big fan of, and his finisher Walden Wong, they do most of the heavy lifting in keeping things consistent here, with Sprouse providing breakdowns for most of issues 3 through 5. There's still a few jarring breaks in art style. Issue 2 is a bit of a jumble between Gianfelice, Rick Burkett, and Wilfredo Torres. If you look at this page here, this is one of the more rushed pages from issue 2, or at least it looks rushed, like someone's trying to finish their homework on the school bus the morning it's due. And at the end of issue 5, there's quite a jarring cut from the work of Chris Sprouse and Walden Wong, and it jumps into pages by Ty Templeton, which is it's such a clash stylistically. He has a lot more chunkier lines, more rendered line work, and some pages are even looking like they have unfinished backgrounds. Obviously, I don't know what the schedule was like for this, how late into the game these fill-in artists were contacted, but in places it can be jarring. But with that being said, this series is still a fantastic read. The writing, pacing, and beautiful character work is some of the best Millar I have ever read. It's like he put the brakes on all of the over-the-top set pieces and breakneck pace storytelling and really stopped to think and show us what makes these characters tick. The short arcs were really refreshing too, and I kind of wish that this was an ongoing series, and I wish Millar would try something like this again someday. Okay, and lastly we have Jupiter's Legacy Volume 2. I still really like this, however this arc is a bit more bang pow than the first one, which makes it a bit of a breezier read and perhaps not quite as intriguing as the first volume. And without giving away too much of the story, it basically revolves around a few superheroes who now operate underground from the police state which Brandon and Walter are running, and it involves them rounding up a team and basically going to kick their ass. The most interesting character in this arc is a guy called Skyfox, who barely appears in the first volume but plays a big role in Jupiter's Circle, where he's really fleshed out. So if you were going to skip that, like I was saying earlier, his character and motivations may seem a bit fuzzier to you at the end of Jupiter's Legacy, so Jupiter's Circle it fills in a lot of that. I think I would have enjoyed probably seeing more of this story arc from his perspective actually. The art is still incredible and quietly seems to be operating at a much more consistent pace here. However, there was still somehow a 9-month delay waiting on the final issue between issues 4 and 5. But all in all, the story kind of wraps up the Jupiter's Legacy world with a neat little bow for now. I know there's a final series that was released fairly recently called Jupiter's Legacy Requiem, which as of this recording I have not read, but I am very much looking forward to it. And as for which of these titles do I recommend all of them. Buy them all and read them. Like I said, how to read Starlight on a Sunday morning with a nice cup of coffee. And the Jupiter's franchise, just read Jupiter's Legacy Volume 1, then both volumes of Jupiter's Circle, and then follow that up with Jupiter's Legacy Volume 2, and you'll have a great time. It's a wonderful read. So that's it for today. Until next time, take it easy, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.